Okay. So I'm just about ready to begin. I'm not sure if Sarah is going to be coming back. Oh, thank you. Thanks. It's a bit messy at the moment. That cat. I wish I could hear you guys. We could be chatting a little bit, but. Okay, so Sarah's here. I'm just going to go ahead with the presentation then. Let me share my screen here. I'm a little bit tech challenged, so hopefully this works out. We tested this earlier. Oh no, Sarah! You said you're talking. I can't hear anything. Oh, maybe I'm the only one who can't hear her. What? Oh, shoot. Okay. I'm wondering, should we start this over again or something? Maybe something's up on one of our sides. I might leave and then come back and just see if that fixes it. Because I definitely want to hear you. Okay, I'm going to leave and come back. I'll be right back.
Can you hear me now, Siobhan?
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. So that worked. It was just on my end, I guess.
Yeah, so weird. Yeah, this whole time I've been talking and going, can y'all hear me? Can y'all hear me? And everyone's like, yeah, we can hear you. So I'm like, I guess Siobhan's just not responding.
Oh, no. I'm clueless. Wait, can you hear everyone else?
No.
Or are they just texting in
the... that are unmuted.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, because we're the presenters.
So I am recording, and I'm hoping that you guys can see my screen here.
I'm going to pull open Siobhan's stream. And as we get started, would you like me to give you a quick intro to the game?
Yeah, you can if you want to. I've also got an intro here in my presentation, but yeah, if you want to introduce me to your people.
I'll give my quickie intro then. So this is my friend Siobhan, everyone. Siobhan is a professional story artist, which is how we met doing the professional story artist thing. And she's extremely cool and very good at what she does, which is why I invited her to come and share amazing knowledge about storyboarding.
Thanks, Sarah, for saying so. I'm really happy to be here and sharing this. I'm hoping that it will be helpful for you guys. We did take the poll to see everyone's experience level, and it seems like a lot of you are pretty new to storyboarding. But if you're not, I'm sorry. This is going to be pretty introductory stuff. But hopefully there's something in there that's interesting, maybe that you haven't heard before. I really wanted to add more to this, but I kind of ran out of time at the end. So it's going to be a very basic overview. But yeah, hopefully you'll learn something from it. Okay, so yeah, here's my intro to storyboarding workshop. Focusing here on how to tell a clear story. Just for the purposes of this workshop, I'm not going to be going into writing or story structure or any of that. I'm going to be kind of assuming that you're starting off with a script already, or that you have a good idea of what your story is already going to be, and just focus on the technical, because there's a lot to get into with storyboarding. So just to keep it simple for this, I'm just going to focus on the technical stuff that you'll definitely want to know if you want to be a professional. Okay, so to begin, who am I? Sarah kind of introduced me a bit, but I just wanted to go into a little bit more. My name's Siobhan. I have been drawing since I could hold a pencil. Been watching animation for my whole life. I graduated from CalArts in 2020 at the height of the pandemic, and have worked freelance in short animated film as a 2D animator on short films. I did an internship at Pixar, and then this past year and a half I was working on a feature film with Sarah, and that's how we met. I was working as a storyboard artist on that. And my interest is mostly in feature film, so most of this is going to be directed towards that, but I'll also give some perspective into TV as well, if that's something that you're interested in getting into. So that's me in a nutshell. So, all right, basics. What does a storyboard artist do? What is a storyboard artist? The role of a storyboard artist on a production, this is really basic stuff, but is generally to visualize the script and then pitch that as if it was a comic. And you guys know this because you've seen Sarah's animatics. You know what that is, what an animatic is. But the job of a storyboard artist, a professional storyboard artist, is going to vary a lot depending on the kind of production that you're working on, whether it's TV or feature film. The major differences between TV and feature film mostly are that in TV, you're going to be drawing a lot more on model because they're going to be taking those boards and animating them pretty much straight from your storyboards. So you have to have very clear drawings, and they have to be on model, proper scale, and everything like that. In feature film, that's not as important, depending on what you're working on, but especially in CG feature film, you can be a lot more loose and expressive, and it's a lot more about landing the pacing and the jokes and the scene structure and everything like that. Sometimes you'll be asked to come up with story ideas on a feature film as well, depending on what kind of production you're on, depending on what the scale and the budget of it is. You might be sitting down with the director and they'll ask you to come up with your own version of a scene. So that's possible. Sometimes storyboarding overlaps with writing. And in TV as well, depending on if it's a script-driven show, an outline-driven show, or a board-driven show, that's going to depend how much creativity you have as well. So a script-driven show, you're just drawing the script exactly as it is on the page. An outline, it'll be like these two characters, they go to the supermarket and they get up to all sorts of fun. And then you have to go and make up the whole story and all of the gags and the dialogue. And same with board-driven. Board-driven often is where you get to kind of come up with an idea you get to be a writer and a storyboard artist. I say get to be, but it's very demanding, and generally storyboard artists, it depends on the artist, but this isn't very popular with storyboard artists because you're essentially doing two jobs and only getting paid for one. But that is there are a lot of board-driven shows out there, like Adventure Time is one of them, where the artists who are brought to it really get to craft the show as they go. And then 2D or 3D, depending on what you're working on. For generally a 2D animated show, you're not going to have as many complicated camera moves. For CG, you can have a lot looser drawings, but you can have much more dynamic camera moves and action and stuff like that. It's just going to be a lot harder to produce in 2D. And then, of course, like this is all, your storyboarding is also going to have to adapt to whatever the budget and the schedule is for the production that you're working on. So if you're working at Pixar, much bigger budget than if you're working at a small independent studio. And at a small studio, you might only have one chance to go through the whole storyboard, whereas at Pixar, you might go through it, the whole film, like 4 or 6 times, or however many times until they get it right. So that's a basic overview. And please let me know as I go along if you have any questions. Please put them in the chat. Like I said, this is a very basic overview, but if anything comes up, I'm very happy to answer any questions you have. So just you can just put them in the chat and we'll go over them at the end. Sorry, what'd you say, Sarah?
We do have one quick question.
Okay.
That Humble put in the chat there, which is there officially a difference between a storyboard and an animatic? Is an animatic just an animated storyboard?
That's a great question. Yeah, basically an animatic is an animated storyboard, generally with sound, and it's all timed out. The way that it would work in a production, however, is as a storyboard artist, you're generally not making your own animatics for the production. What will happen is you'll have your finished storyboards, you'll pitch them, sometimes you'll do a recording of that pitch, and then you'll send it to an editor. And then the editor is going to put it together into an animatic for you with all the voice actors, the scratch dialogue, sound effects and everything. And that'll be what they screen to people or what they send further on down the line to get it into animation. Sometimes you will be asked to do your own timing in an animatic. I know on TV shows, because they work in Storyboard Pro, it's very easy to make your own animatic. You just slide the frames around on the timeline. And so sometimes they do ask you to do like a rough timing of your own pass. So I have heard about that. I've never done that personally, but I do know that happens sometimes. So yeah, basics. Storyboards are just the drawings. An animatic is something that is timed out into a movie format. Some with or without sound. Usually with sound. Okay, so moving on. Okay, so we're going to go over the basics here. And if you've heard all of this before, I'm sorry, just bear with me here. But if you haven't heard any of this before, please pay attention because this is very important. The first thing we're going to start with is the 180-degree rule, or the 180 rule. And this is, if you break this rule in your storyboards or your portfolio, everybody's going to know you're not ready to be a professional storyboard artist. This is like the foundation. And I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of this, but I'm going to go over it anyway. Just in case there's anyone out there who hasn't heard of it or isn't quite clear on what it is and how it works. Okay, just beginning with, let's imagine we have a desk here, and we have two characters who are sitting on opposite sides of the desk, and they're talking to each other. And we have character A in pink and character B in green. Now, the 180-degree rule is... Well, I'm going to explain it visually. This is the easiest way to do it. So here we go. We got an overhead view. We got character A on one side of the desk and character B on the other. And the 180 line is an invisible line that cuts through the eye line of the characters. And the eye line is who is looking at who is interacting with who in the scene. And this is important to keep in mind because when you're starting... Well, it's really simple when you're just doing two characters, but when you have suddenly a table with 6 characters talking over dinner, it gets a lot more complicated. Or you have characters moving around a room, it can become a lot more complicated. So just remember, it's this invisible line that cuts from the eye line of the character or the point of view of the camera. And basically, the 180 rule is that you pick one side or the other of this line, and you stay on that side. So I can put the camera on this side of the line and I can move it around anywhere, pretty much anywhere on this side of the line. But once I cross that line, then it's broken. And that's what you don't want to do. You never want to cross the line. And that would be called breaking the 180. So this is how it would look in boards. If we go back here, we got all these different camera angles, and this is how it would actually look if it was on the screen. The basic way this translates is that the character is always going to be on the same side of the screen. No matter what camera angle you do, they're always going to be on the same side of the screen. And so character B here is always going to be on the right-hand side, and character A is always going to be on the left, no matter what kind of shot you got. If it's an overhead view, they're still going to be on the right side. If they get up and they leave the office, they're still going to be on the right, and character A is going to be on the left. So no matter what your composition is, you're going to want to keep them on the same side of the screen. And this doesn't just go for... Yeah, he's... Bad cat, he's being left behind. But this is really just to keep clarity. It makes things easy for the audience to understand. It's not just for characters interacting. It could also be for a character like looking at something off in the distance. Whatever they're looking at, whatever that eye line is going to be on the opposite side of the screen from that character. Now here's an example of breaking the rule. So here we go. We flipped it. This would be wrong. We have character A on the right side now and character B on the left. So that's broken. That's a broken 180 rule. The way to fix this very simply would just be to flip it, and then it's okay. So that's the 180 rule in a nutshell, in case you haven't heard of it. Now, when I was in school, it used to really bother me. Teachers would always say, never, never, never break the 180 rule. But I knew for a fact that wasn't true. Like, there are definitely times when you can break the 180 rule, but you have to know how to do it. and it has to be motivated by the story. It has to have a good reason for changing, because the way that it's going to feel to an audience is a little bit unsettling, like something has changed. And it's a subtle thing, but it makes a difference. So I have an example here from the movie Her. If anybody's seen it, it's one of my favorite movies. I just watched it the other day and it's so good. The gist of the story is basically it's set in this futuristic place, futuristic timeline, and this lonely guy is going through a divorce with his wife, and he falls in love with his AI operating system, his computer. So this is the scene where he first meets her, and I'm going to run through what's happening here in this scene. So we begin, he's setting up this new operating system on his computer. By the way, can you guys all see my mouse here if I'm pointing? Are you guys able to see that? Okay, good.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Okay, so he's sitting here on the left side of the screen, computer's on the right. He's getting it set up and the computer's asking him questions like, do you consider yourself a social person? He's talking, he's still on the right, he's still on the left, computer's on the right this whole time. And he's going back and forth, and this is how the shots are mostly set up. And then we cut to a neutral shot of the computer, and it's processing, and it's like, okay, we're setting up your OS now. And it's processing, and this is a neutral shot. It's straight on. It's not from an angle at all. Nothing's on the right or the left now. It's straight, dead center. This is how you break the 180. And now we cut to the opposite side. This is a break in the 180. He's now on the right side of the screen. And when we return back to the computer, then we hear this OS's voice. Her name is, I forget her name. But she's like, hello, I'm here. And he basically falls in love. It's Scarlett Johansson's voice. And so in this moment, we have a flip of the 180. So something has changed. This is the beginning of the story for him. So this is a great example of how it's done. Okay, how it's done in a movie. So basically, just to recap, always want to keep characters on the same side of the screen, no matter the camera angle, unless if you want to flip it for the story reasons. This is a story reason. He's meeting his, romantic interest for the rest of the film. You want to first cut to a neutral shot and then flip to the other side. There are a couple of other ways to do this. You can sometimes do it with a camera move, which is a really nice, subtle way to do it. So when you're doing film studies and stuff, look out for this kind of stuff and see if you can find any of your own good examples of how to do it. Okay. And then the next thing kind of related to that is screen direction. So you want to keep the audience's eye basically in the same position on the screen, unless you're switching between subjects, you're talking between stuff like that. But generally you want to keep their eye in the same part of the screen as you cut between shots. And this is going to make the transitions and cuts feel smoother and almost invisible. That's what you want. You don't want the audience to notice cuts. So, yeah, and then throughout the film as well, if a character is moving, if there's a chase scene, especially a chase scene, an action scene, or sometimes even the whole entire film, you want to keep the characters moving in the same direction. So like from left to right, right to left, but all throughout the whole scene at least, if not the whole movie. So to keep things clear, some filmmakers, they use screen direction as almost a language in their film to help clarify the theme of the film. And so to give you an example of this, there's a really great example. Now, maybe you like or don't like Disney. It doesn't really matter. They do this really well, and this was a really intentional choice. So this is an example from Moana. This is the first scene, her classic Princess I Want song, where she stares longingly into the distance and sets up, what the story is going to be and what she wants. And so she's singing about how she wants the ocean, but her family is holding her back in some ways, or her tradition is holding her back in some ways. And so we see in the first panel, she's staring off, screen right. She's staring off into the ocean, screen right. And then in this shot, this is actually a really nice camera move where the camera twirls around her and then she looks back to the left, away from her dream, back towards her village. And then back again, screen right towards the ocean. And then, further on, the scene goes on. She's leaning towards the ocean. She's on the boat. Here, actually, I have some drawovers here. She's leaning forward. She's looking out towards the ocean, towards the horizon. And then there's this whole sequence where she goes back through the village, and the whole time she's going from right to left now. She's going backwards, away from her dream. And then the scene ends up with her at the top of this mountain. There's this big dramatic and climax to the song, to the musical song, where she slides down this branch, She runs past these geysers. Everything is suddenly quickly moving left towards right, and she goes back to the ocean and ends up going out on the ocean. And this was a really intentional choice by the filmmakers. I was just in a talk the other day with one of the storyboard artists who worked on this film. He was explaining another example of how they use this screen direction to kind of subtly tell the story is in this scene, the You're Welcome song, where she meets Maui. Now, Maui, if you haven't seen the movie, he's sort of this trickster god, and he essentially is throwing up an obstacle in her path. And so the screen direction in this scene, interestingly, is now starting to push her back towards the left side of the screen. So we see it starts off with her on the right side of the screen and Maui on the left. She's looking at him quizzically. And then, brilliantly, he spins her around and spins her to the other side of the screen. And for the rest of the sequence, for the most part, they are now starting to move from right to left throughout the whole scene. The boat is now moving right to left, going backwards on her journey. And then the scene ends with her being spun. He spins her into this cave and closes the door on her. And now she's on the left side of the screen and Maui's on the right. And so this is very intentionally trying to subtly give us the feeling that she's heading backwards. And throughout the whole movie of Moana, the screen direction is moving from left to right as she progresses towards her goal. So that's just something to keep in mind. Not every film does this, but some filmmakers are very intentional with that. Another example, if you guys have ever seen Wolfwalkers, they also did it in this film. They try to keep the town on the left and the forest that represents the wolves and the werewolves on the right side of the screen. And they try to maintain that screen direction throughout the whole film as well. So that's another example. So before I go on any further, are there any questions? Yeah, and so like Tumble said, so yeah, you can break the rule in order to say something. And essentially what you're saying by flipping the 180 rule is it starts to feel like a switch of power, maybe. Maybe power is moving from one character to the other. Something is changing in the scene. The dynamic of the scene is changing. Maybe there's new information revealed. Something like that. But it's, you don't want to change it just for any reason because it's going to feel weird. But if you want it to feel weird or unsettling or like something's changing, that's when you do it. So
I've seen the breaking the 180 rule used to create a sense of disorientation of like a character on the screen not knowing what is going on and what's happening around them, and the audience is with them in that, and so the 180 rule is switching back and forth is they're lost in the confusion as well.
Yeah, totally. And that's how it feels. It feels disorienting if you break it. So you only want to do that intentionally because you don't want your audience to be disoriented unless it's on purpose, Okay, I'm going to move on. Okay, and then now we're moving on to some perspective tips. These are really basic perspective tips, but when you're drawing your storyboards, just a very basic thing to make sure your boards are clear. Try to always have something in the background of your short. Avoid blank backgrounds whenever possible. Even if it's something as simple as just a basic grid. It's a night and day difference between this and this. And it gives us a basic idea of what kind of shot it is. Like, for instance, if we have the grid on the bottom, now it's a down shot. Nothing about this character is changing, but just a little hint of a background. You really want to have that in every shot that you have. A basic grid somewhere or a basic indication of the background that's going to give you an idea of where your character's at and what the angle of the camera is. So try wherever possible to not leave your backgrounds blank. A quick way to make your shot more cinematic is to lower the horizon line. So I'm going to give you an example here. We have this character who is kind of in a cityscape landscape, but this background, the horizon line here is smack dab in the middle of the screen. And the way this feels is just kind of boring. It doesn't feel one way or the other. It's not very dynamic. It feels boring when you look at it. But if we lower the horizon, immediately it feels more cinematic. And all I did here was lower the horizon. I also kind of skewed the buildings a little bit just to give it a little bit of a 3-point perspective, but that's it. And that can make a huge dramatic difference in the way that your shots feel. Generally, they say that if you want to make something feel cinematic, you lower the horizon line. That's the easiest way to do it. You can also diagonal. I didn't draw this, but you can also make the horizon line diagonal if it's an action sequence and you want it to feel dynamic. That's another good way to do that. But overall, you want to avoid this kind of composition as much as possible. You want to avoid your characters being dead center in the middle of the screen and your horizon line being in the center. This is a mistake I see very commonly with like beginning story artists. But generally, you want your horizon line either to be down here in the lower fourth quarter or in the higher upper fourth corner. Or if it's like an overhead shot, that would be completely different. But you get what I'm saying. Now here's a perspective tip that's really, really helpful. When you're drawing multiple characters in perspective, there's this technique that's known as hanging on the line. I first learned this at Pixar. This is how they describe it. It's called hanging on the line. So basically, if we have our shot here, we got our horizon line here, and we have two characters that are more or less the same height. And I'll get into later if you have characters of different heights, but if they're more or less the same height, wherever the horizon line is intersecting them, you can scale these characters up and down as long as they're always intersecting the horizon line at the same point. In this case, it's at this guy's thighs. And you can scale them at any size, put them anywhere in the scene, as long as they're crossing that horizon line at their thigh level or the same point, it will always be accurate perspective. Yeah. This is a really great trick. And it helps you really quickly figure out perspective, and you know it's going to be accurate if you use this rule. And likewise, you can also reverse engineer accurate perspective using this same concept. So the way that you would do this is, let's say that this is what you know you want your composition to be, but you can't quite figure out where the ground is supposed to be and how you're supposed to draw the background, and you don't really know where the perspective is. So the way that you would do this is you look at where these two characters are intersecting, and in this shot, it's at their eye line right here. And that is where your horizon is going to be. And so technically, this is accurate perspective. It's not the greatest. Like I said, like the horizon line's kind of a little bit in the middle of the screen. You could kind of mess with this, but that's a way to reverse engineer it anyway. And then a couple tips here just to make your drawings clearer. Like, let's say you're storyboarding something and you're getting kind of lost in the drawings and you're having trouble following the characters. This might help you a little bit in clearing that up. So let's say this is your drawing, okay? This is the same drawing from before, but we got our character here in the foreground. We got our perspective grid in our background. So one of the first things that you want to do is color in behind the character. You don't have to color in behind the character. You could also just erase the lines behind the character, but you don't want to have those lines cutting through the character. That's confusing. Lower the opacity on the grid line. I usually leave it at like the lowest opacity setting, just so it's very, very barely there. Make your background a lighter color. The further away an object is going to be, the lighter it's going to be. And so technically I should have made these further buildings a little bit lighter. That would add a little bit more to the perspective, but you don't need to get that nitpicky about it. You can blur the background. That's going to make it stand out even more. And then if you have a foreground element, you also want to blur that and make it darker. And so these are very quick ways to clear up your boards. And you don't have to do all of these things, you know. But if you find that you're having trouble following your character, maybe just coloring in behind the character is going to be enough to make it read quickly. Or maybe just blurring the lines behind the character is going to be enough without even adding tone. You know, maybe that's going to be enough to clear it up. So these are just some small tips. Casey Sketches is asking, does the line thickness matter? And if so, what's the recommended brush size? For me, I never change my brush size. I keep it the same. I try to work with a pretty big brush because the smaller the brush, the more nitpicky you're going to get with your details. You're going to start noodling your drawings, and you don't want that in storyboarding. You want to be working quickly and gesturally. Even this is a little bit clean, honestly. This is it's pretty clean. It could be a lot rougher than this and still be clear. So for line thickness, I usually keep it the same. I don't mess around with it too much unless my brush is too thick and I'm not able to do a little pupil. And then maybe I'll change it, but I can show you a little. Yeah, totally.
I will say a principle from comics that can also carry over, and it's another quiver in your sheath. It's another tool you can use. Thicker lines will move forward. They'll stand out more and feel like they're closer to camera, and thinner lines will feel farther away. So that's another way you can move things more clearly within the space, as well as opacity, color, lightness to dark, thin to thick. You don't have to use all of it. You can use some of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely, if it's something that you're able to do quickly, like if you have like a pressure setting on your brush where like if you press lighter, it's thinner, and you're able to do that quickly, then it's definitely a technique in illustration and in art. Like Sarah said, like things in the foreground have thicker lines, things further away have thinner lines. But the only thing is that like you don't want to be wasting too much time on stuff like that if you're storyboarding. If you want to be working quickly. And so if you find yourself getting slowed down by trying to change the line thicknesses, don't worry about it, you know. But if you naturally draw that way, that can definitely help. You know, if you know how to draw that way quickly, that can definitely help. And then I also wanted to say with this shot, since adding in the foreground character, this kind of changed the composition a little bit. So technically, I would kind of change this to get rid of some of the empty space on the right side. This is something you also see with newer storyboard artists is they make their frames way too wide. You want to fill up the screen as much as possible with your characters almost touching the edges of the frames. Or even... well, you don't want them to be touching because that would be a tangent, but they could be going a little bit past. But basically, you want them to be filling up as much of the screen as possible. This is way too much empty space on the left side here. It worked a little bit better when there wasn't someone in there, but this doesn't quite work as well. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Yeah. And then another quick tip is if you want to be changing the expression and you don't want to redraw the whole thing, but you want it to have a sense of movement, use the perspective tool in Photoshop, or the distort tool or the warp tool. And I know there's equivalents of this in Storyboard Pro, but basically, like for instance with this drawing here, I'm just changing her expression, but it doesn't really feel like she's moving very much. And so you don't really get the feeling of her changing her expression. But if I just adjusted her slightly like this, now it feels a little bit more like a change of expression. I'm not having to redraw the whole thing. So that's a really quick tip that can help your boards feel, get a more sense of movement. You can almost kind of like pseudo animate it this way. Yeah, but it's very fast. Okay, I didn't get to dive into this as much as I was hoping, but I'm going to try to give you an example later with, I'm going to do a little bit of a scene analysis, and I'll try to touch on this a little bit more. But something that's very important is POV storytelling. And so the idea behind this is that wherever you have the camera is always telling a story from a point of view, whether or not you're conscious of it or not. And as filmmakers and story artists, we want to be conscious of this, and we want to be using this to our advantage. So you want to be thinking, whose perspective is it that I'm telling this from? And which character are we experiencing the story through? And the ways that this appears in boards is things like over the shoulders, over your main character, looking at what they're looking at. Or close-up shots of your character having a reaction to something that they're seeing. You want to be very sparing with close-up shots. If you use them too much, it kind of dulls the effect of them. You only want to use them, sparingly and in the right place. And a great place to use that is doing a reaction shot from your main character, or having a realization. Anytime you want to show an emotion on the face of your main character, or whoever's point of view you're trying to tell the scene from, close-ups are great for that. I'll try to get more in depth on that later in my scene analysis. Okay, then I just wanted to go over briefly the rough storyboarding process, just in case you've never heard this before. But let's say you got a script page and you're not really sure where to start. The first thing that you do is you read through your script several times and get a good feel of the story. And while you're reading, you want to notice what's standing out to you and what parts are automatically creating images in your mind. That's where you're going to start. And then sit down for a minute. I like to sit down and kind of close my eyes and just try to visualize the story playing in your head with all the main beats and the emotional changes happening in the scene. Every scene is basically a mini story with a beginning, middle, and end. So thinking about those major turning points in the scene, the changes in emotion that are going to be happening. Try to visualize what those shots are going to look like a music video in your head. And then you're going to sit down and do your thumbnails. Before you go to thumbnails, you might start sketching the characters and trying to find a shorthand for them that's easier for you to draw. Or by designing the environment, planning the layout and the blocking within the scene. That might be some stuff, but sometimes you will skip right through that. Like, especially if you've already drawn these characters many times, you don't really need to do that. And then you go into thumbnails, just like it sounds. They're tiny little sketches the size of your thumb that just give the essentials of the shot. They're stick figures, basic compositions. This is where you're going to figure out all of your shots, all your transitions and cuts, your camera moves, and your basic acting is all going to get figured out in the thumbnails. And the reason why you make them so small is because you don't feel bad if you throw them out. You can do them over and over again. You can try many different angles, and it doesn't hurt because they're so simple and basic. Here's an example of some thumbnails that I did. These are quite old, but it's just to give you an idea. They're more or less stick figures with the dialogue and just planning out the shots and the movement throughout the scene. And planning out, trying out different things and seeing what works. And then from your thumbnails, sometimes you'll be pitching those to the director, but often you're just going to be keeping those to yourself. It's just for you. And then you're going to move on to your rough drawings. And this is what you're going to generally be pitching to your director or your head of story on a production. They need to be clear enough to understand, but they don't have to be perfect by any means. You just got to make sure that you have your characters in the right place on the screen, in the right scale, your background or perspective grid there, and your expressions. But the expressions can be very simple. Just dot eyes and a smile. You just got to know what the emotion is on the character. And then if there's time, you'll do a cleanup pass. This doesn't happen a lot of the time in productions. Oftentimes in TV, there just isn't time for this. And if there is going to be cleanup, it's going to be done by a storyboard revisionist or not at all. For feature, depending on the production, like sometimes they need those boards to be very clean, but generally what will happen is the storyboard artist will do the boards, and then if they're not able to clean the whole thing up, a storyboard revisionist will go in and clean it up, so that it's all on model and ready to be shipped. But the storyboard artist will be moving on to the next thing. And then for feature film, they only polish and color in their boards for the art books. So if you go through art books and you see storyboards from feature films and they look gorgeous, trust me, that is not how it's done on a real production. It's a lie. They're just trying to make it look nice for the book. that's very, unless it's for a screening for like a public audience that isn't in the studio, like for kids or something, and it needs to be very clear. That's the only time they're going to be really cleaning things up with like shading and all of that. So, okay, and then I wanted to analyze this scene from Jurassic Park. This is one of my all-time favorite movies, and I'm going to assume that you guys have all seen it. There's a lot going on in this scene, but there's two things that I kind of want to zero in on here and show you because these are great examples. One of the things is recomposing shots instead of cutting. And so when you're planning your shots, I often see like newer storyboard artists, they cut a lot. And what a lot of cutting does is it kind of changes the pacing of the scene. It can make it feel a bit more high energy, but you don't always want that. Wherever possible, you want to try and combine shots into one and have several things going on in one shot. An artist who does this brilliantly that gets brought up a lot is Norman Rockwell. If you ever look at his illustrations, it's just a single drawing, but it will tell a complete story. And it's clear, and it's all in the way that it's set up and composed. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. And Steven Spielberg is a master of this technique. So I'm going to show you a couple examples of that. In this scene in particular, this is the scene where they're seeing the dinosaurs for the first time in the park. It's creating a sense of awe. And we're experiencing it through, once again, getting back to that POV storytelling, we're experiencing it through the characters, seeing these dinosaurs for the first time, almost in real time. And that's what this lack of cutting does from a filmmaking, from a cinematography perspective. If the scene had more cuts, it would change the pacing and the flow of the scene. You'll see what I mean here in a second. And it's more interesting to watch too when you recompose your scenes like this, because there's more movement in the frame. It's really engaging. And then the other thing that I want to point out in this is just POV storytelling. Who's the main character in this scene, and what are they experiencing, and how is it driving the movie forward? Okay, so I'm just going to pull this up real quick. Like I said, I'm going to assume that you guys have already seen this, so I'm not going to play the whole thing. It's only 3 minutes long, but I'm just going to scrub through it and point out a couple different points. So this shot, the scene starts, and it's muted here. The scene starts in this like medium wide shot with all four of these characters in the car. And so what this does is it establishes the setting. And this isn't the first shot of the scene or anything, but it establishes the setting and the relationship of all these characters and where everybody is. But then we're going to move in on Grant, who is our main character. He's the POV that we're seeing this scene through. He's the character that we're experiencing this scene through. And we move into this like medium shot. And then he stands up, and once again we got this close-up shot on him. And so once again, close-up on his eyes. And this is called, there's actually a name for this. I think it's called like the Spielberg stare, because he does it so much, where he has this character like staring into the screen with a sense of awe, like seeing something amazing. And then we cut to what it is they're seeing. He does it a lot, but it's really effective. So we're feeling this emotion with Grant when we're seeing this. And then here again with Ellie, he does it again here. Here, we start with her, and then she stands up, and this slight camera adjust to this close-up of the two of them seeing it together. And then we have this beautiful pan. This is helping establish the scale and the awe. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about. This is all beautiful and great to study as well. Really effective cinematography. So we have Hammond here in a medium shot. Okay? He comes forward to the screen, and we have this close-up shot. Okay, as he walks by the screen, and we see the delight on his face. He walks right past the camera, and we recompose on these two characters also staring in awe. Okay, and this is establishing what's going on with the other characters and how they're reacting to what's happening. But it's just beautiful the way that he recomposes. There's essentially 3 shots in this one shot. You know, a less experienced story artist or filmmaker might cut this up into 3 different shots. But Spielberg really masterfully ties it all together, sews it all together, and it feels seamless. Slow pushing. This is a story point. He's starting to realize that they're going to make him a lot of money on the park. This is okay, and then this shot right here is another great example. So he's basically telling her, important story point here, that there's a T-Rex in the park. Okay, so we start on this over the shoulder of Hammond with Ellie in the middle, and then watch. We recompose to this shot as Grant comes in, and then it's these two profile shots. Once again, because Grant is our main character in this scene. Ellie is also the secondary main character, but it's really Grant that we're like experiencing this through. So it's his shock that we need to see in hearing this news from Hammond that they have a T-Rex, which is going to be important later in the movie, as you guys all know. That's just beautiful, the way he did that. Yeah. Here's another example. He's, has to take a breather for a second. Hammond walks towards the screen. It started in this medium wide shot, and he walks up to a medium shot. And then we get this great close-up on Grant. And that's kind of how the scene ends, with this Spielberg stare and this ultra-wide shot of the dinosaurs. Okay, so this is pretty basic, but I just wanted to run through this as an example of a way to analyze a scene and what you might want to be thinking about when you're starting to block and plan your scenes. Whose point of view are we telling this through? If we told the story through Hammond's point of view, the old, this guy, the story, it would be completely different. It would be all about him. He knows what's here already. He's seen these dinosaurs. He made them. So it would be all about him seeing the reactions of the other characters and what he was thinking and feeling when he saw their reactions. But we don't have any of that because we're not experiencing the story through his point of view. So anyway, it's just not to get too overboard, but that's a way to analyze a scene. Those are some things that you should be thinking about when storyboarding. Okay, and now I'm going to move into the Q&A. I have a couple questions here that were submitted ahead of time. I don't have any drawings to go along with these, but hopefully it's clear. So from Breezefire or Breezefire, I'm not really sure. The question was, if there's a complex movement that can't necessarily be explained in only a few frames. Actually, hold on. Before we move into the Q&A, was all of that clear, the rest of the presentation? Does anybody have any questions at this point? It looks like some people are typing here. No? Okay. Just want to make sure I'm not like steamrolling ahead. Okay, so for example, so this question is, if you got a complex camera movement that can't necessarily be done in a couple of frames, what should you do? If the camera's spinning around a character and changing angles as the character moves, it's hard to do with minimal frames. Should you fully animate it? Or how much should you animate it? Okay, and so here is my answer to this. This is a great question. I'm so glad you asked. These were all great questions. Thank you guys so much. Really thoughtful questions. Okay, so unfortunately, camera moves are almost always going to be time consuming to board. That's just the way it is. There's no getting around that. And you're going to have to do whatever it takes to sell that camera move. And what I mean by selling it is it's got to be convincing and clear. It's got to be enough frames that when you hand it off to an editor and you're not there in the room to explain it, it's still clear. And so you just got to make that judgment call for yourself, like how many frames you need to put in. The biggest thing that can go wrong here is if you don't add enough frames, it'll feel like a jump cut instead of a camera move. And I meant to explain this earlier in drawing, so I'm just going to draw this really quickly, just in case you guys have never heard of what a jump cut is. This is something that you really want to avoid in your storyboarding. Essentially, a jump cut is where a cut between two drawings is not different enough to feel like a cut. So let's say we have a character here and they're like, oh. And then our next cut that we were trying to do is a profile shot of them going, oh. Okay, but in a different direction. And because these characters, it could probably be a little slower for it to really emphasize that it's a jump cut. Like this. So even though you're trying to do a cut here, this doesn't read as a cut. This reads as like an awkward camera move because the characters are more or less the same size on screen and in the same position on the screen. So in order to avoid this, you need to kind of change. You want to make like at least a 20% change scale difference in the drawings. So one way to do this is to make this more of like a medium shot. Okay, so pull out a little bit on this character. And then this more close shot, this feels more like a cut. So basically you just want to change the size differences. And this can show up in several ways, but yeah, a jump cut is any time where the change between the two frames is not enough for it to feel like a real cut. And so this is something that can happen a lot when you're trying to storyboard camera moves. That's a really common thing, is it can just feel like a bunch of jump cuts if you don't add enough frames in between. So I'm going to go into how to do this, but another thing to keep in mind before you get started on doing a camera move like this and spending all this time on it is you really want to make sure that this camera move is justified and appropriate for the project and the story that you're working on. Just like breaking the 180 rule, you want to make sure there's a story reason behind it. This is a moment of revelation with your character. Or any moment you want to add like a bit of a flourish. I mean, you guys know how camera moves are used, but and how it feels, but you don't want to overuse them. You want to use them at their appropriate time. And for instance, like if you're working on a 2D traditionally animated project, this is not something that you want to be doing. It's going to be very expensive and time consuming unless you're doing it on your own. Like the production is really not going to want you to do that. So normally this is only appropriate to do on a 3D project or a live action project. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're working on a production. If you're doing this kind of thing yourself and you just want to make yourself miserable by animating a camera move, then go ahead, But when you're working with other people, it's something you got to keep in mind. And then it's pretty common, you see this a lot in newer storyboard artist portfolios, to do complex camera moves because they're trying to impress people and show off their skills or give a sense of epicness. But you really need to make sure it's justified by the story. It's very common that people do these like complicated moves of a character like going down a staircase and turning the corner, but all that's happening is the character is going downstairs. Like nothing is happening in the story, but yet you have this crazy camera move. And yeah, it's cool that you can board that, but like you're more often than not, you're going to come off as amateur. Now, that being said, there are times when camera moves are awesome and necessary. So I'm going to give you some tips on how to do it if you've gone through all this and you decide you do want to do it. So with all of that in mind, how do you do it? The first thing you're going to do is you're going to start by keyframing your camera move. Okay, so you're going to draw the beginning, middle, and end of your camera move, the positions that you know that you want to have in the shot. Okay, if you're going around a character, you want to draw those main angles. And then just like in animation, you're going to go through it and add in-betweens to smooth it out. If you're not sure if it's reading as a camera move, just show it to a friend. Don't tell them anything. Don't tell them anything. Just ask if it's clear or not, and see what their reaction is. And then another tip is, instead of redrawing every frame, similar to what I showed you before with like how you can adjust a character drawing with the perspective tool, instead of redrawing every frame with a camera move, what you can do is you can reposition your drawings. I'm going to try to draw this in Photoshop too, just because it's easier to draw. We got a character in the foreground. we got a character in the background. This is so rough. And we got some trees back here. Okay. So, if you're doing a camera move, instead of having to redraw this whole thing, and you're doing a spin around the character, some things you can do is just shift the drawings. Okay, wait, hold on. In order to show you this properly, got to do a layer comp here. One sec. Okay. Just shift the drawings. So, we'll shift this guy this way, this guy this way. And here, I'm going to make this guy move just a little bit less. So this is parallax, where something that's in the foreground is going to move a lot quicker than stuff that's in the background. But this is going to give a feeling of like a camera move. And if we keep moving here, we can start to animate, essentially, a camera move. Let's take this guy and make him a little bit bigger. And we're going to start to spin around him. Wait, that's not right. Hold on. Bear with me, guys.
Yeah, when you're boarding something, you're going to have a lot of trial and error like this. Is go, oh, that looks off, and then you adjust until it looks right.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with this stuff, because it's really...
Great example of that.
It's essentially animating. You know, you're flipping through the drawings. By the way, if you guys don't know how to storyboard in Photoshop with layer comps like I'm doing here, I have a great tutorial that I'm going to send to Sarah. I have a list of resources that I think are really helpful, and it's in there. There's a tutorial on how to use layer comps, just in case you want to get some tips on working in Photoshop. Yeah, definitely. I would have loved to have recorded a video myself, but I just didn't have time. But yeah, so that's the basic idea. And then like from here we could start to spin around this character and go into a profile shot. Okay, that's really rough, and so obviously there would need to be an in-between there where the character's more at a 3/4 behind angle, and maybe this is kind of but you see what I'm saying, right? I'm just trying to emphasize that you don't have to draw every drawing of a camera move. You can move the drawings just a little bit, and that can help to flesh it out, and add in some of those in-betweens. So I hope that's clear. I hope that was clear.
Yeah. Tumble had an additional question relative to when to choose to do a fancy camera move a little farther up the chat. They asked, I've got a camera rotation and script I wrote recently, and it's for the big emotional climax. I feel like that's a decent time to do so?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. That's the time that you would want to do something like that. Yeah, emotional climax. I think the key is, like, you don't want to be doing it all the time. You really only do it like once in a scene, maybe, you know?
Unless I might interject, yeah. I feel like a lot of these types of camera, like, do's and don'ts when it comes to storyboarding. So we talked about the 180 rule and also when to break it. And we talked about fancy camera moves and when not to do them. It's all very much like a language where you can use a really verbose, like, fancy word for something, and if you use that word out of context or just to sound fancy, like, oh yes, anti-disestablishmentarianism, people will notice that you're not using it in context and that you're only using it to sound fancy. In the same way, if you're just using fancy camera moves or breaking the 180 rule just because you can, because you want to look like you know what you're doing, people will read that. And so similar, there are appropriate times to use the big fancy words. You know, you can use anti-disestablishmentarianism in context to mean anti-disestablishmentarianism. In the same way, using a fancy camera move when appropriate will do specific things for your storyboarding that you want it to do.
Yeah, exactly. That's such a great way to put it.
Wish I had a better word in my pocket than anti-disestablishmentarianism.
But that's such a great example of this, yeah, fancy vocabulary that isn't necessary all the time, most of the time. But if you use it, if you sprinkle it in just here and there and in the right context, it can be really powerful. Yeah, that's a great example. And also, like, there are times where it's appropriate to break this, and maybe you have tons of fancy camera moves. Like, I was just watching a scene from Arcane the other day. Like, fight scenes, action scenes, those are going to have a lot of camera moves in them, and that would be an appropriate time to do it. But if you're drawing a dramatic scene, you don't need a lot of these, you know, unless it's, like, for the climax. But yeah, that's such a great way to put it, Sarah.
We've got a few more questions on the side before we move on further. Tumble asked, which is more affordable, Storyboard Pro or Photoshop?
Ooh,
Since I mentioned in chat that those are two of kind of the standard. I've kind of seen productions use either Storyboard Pro or Photoshop and layer comps. Those are the two I've seen most commonly used.
Yeah, I'd say Storyboard Pro is more common for TV. That's kind of the standard for TV. And then on feature film, like, it seems to be that people use kind of a mix of everything. But a lot of the older artists tend to use Photoshop. And generally in feature, you see more of Photoshop, but there are definitely people who do feature boards in Storyboard Pro as well. Some people even use Procreate, which is pretty cool. There's a hack to do that. But as far as which one's more affordable, I honestly can't say. I have the monthly subscription for Adobe Creative Cloud that includes Photoshop, and I honestly don't even know how much it is anymore. I don't even think about it. And so I'd have to compare the numbers. I want to say that they're about even as far as subscription costs go. And then sometimes
I would also add that if you're a student, both of those things, either the Creative Cloud or Storyboard Pro, you can get at much more affordable rates if you use the student rate if you happen to be in college or lower.
Yes.
Yeah, if you don't mind me adding in, I can actually tell you guys the student prices.
Okay, yeah.
So the
marvelous.
student, hi, yeah. The student pricings for Storyboard Pro are like $10 per month. And for the entire Adobe Creative Cloud, it's $20 per month. The Storyboard Pro, if you're not planning on using anything else like After Effects, or any of the other Adobe apps, Storyboard Pro is more accessible.
Okay, yeah, totally.
Yes, this is Imber, my producer, on the project that we're working on.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, yeah. I think I've been writing on a student subscription to Adobe Creative Cloud, and it's like $13 a month, and I got a deal like ages ago, and they don't know that I'm not still a student. So I
don't tell them that you're not a student.
Yeah, I don't even know like how that happened. I haven't been paying attention, but and then sometimes studios will pay for your subscription too. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
It's okay. I just also wanted to say that like as long as you have a student email from a university or college at some point, they're not going to really recheck to see if your email's not really working anymore. But also, some universities have specific deals with like Boom or Adobe where you can actually get e-programs for an even more reduced price or for like free.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially if you guys go to an art university, that's something to look into.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Imber. That's very helpful.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no worries.
Looks like we have a couple more questions. We have one here that I'd like to answer in terms of future workshops, just real quick.
Oh yeah.
Dimitri asked, is this for this workshop, are we going to have storyboard critiques or we send in our own storyboards? I think that's a fabulous idea, Dimitri. We're not going to do that today, but I do want to have a workshop where we do that in the future. And if Siobhan would like to come back to that one to help add critique, that would be fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we can decide that later. But there will be more workshops and webinars in the future that involve more hands-on work from the attendees and critique from us hosts.
I would be very happy to do like a feedback session and take like a couple storyboards and go through them and give notes. I'd be really happy to do that. I also have at the end of my presentation, I'm going to give you guys my email, and if you guys ever want to reach out to me and get an opinion on stuff or advice or feedback on your work, like feel free to. I can't guarantee I'll respond like right away, but I'll try my best, definitely. But yeah, I would love to I'd love to do something, because that's really how you learn, is by getting notes on your work. So
it's true. It's true.
Nat, I see here, so less is more, somewhat in terms of storyboarding. I would definitely say that's true. The more efficient and clear you can be, the better. Definitely.
Definitely.
Yeah, I like what tumble liminality. That's a good way to put it. When you would use a camera move, like a more abstract, but yeah. Okay, let's see.
Also, similarly, y'all know me here in the server. If you have stuff that you would like critique on, you can send me a DM anytime.
So I think that's... Okay, I think that's basically the questions for now. Okay, and then, so yeah, that covers camera moves. The next question here is, we got a couple more questions here that I'm going to try to breeze through. I don't want to keep you guys here all day or anything, but these were great questions. So what is, in your opinion, the hardest expression to draw, and how do you go about drawing them? And for me, I usually find like subtle, more realistic expressions to be the most challenging. It's quite easy, at least for me, to do like really cartoony, over-the-top expressions. But when you're trying to do something much more subtle, like a character having a realization or going through a thought process without any dialogue, and you're trying to show that in a realistic way, that can be really, it can be tricky. Expressions for me that are difficult are like a mix of emotions, like conflicting emotions. Shock and fear is one of them. That's surprisingly difficult to draw. Bittersweet sadness and joy, suspicion, those are all pretty difficult. I think for me, I don't necessarily have a shorthand for them. So generally, the more realistic the acting, the harder it is. But the way that I approach this is that if I'm struggling to nail down an expression, either I'll sit there and like act it out and feel what my face is doing, or I'll go over and I'll look in the mirror and I'll try to pay attention. There's like this triangle, or I don't think it's called the triangle, but the things you want to pay attention to are the eyes, the eye, and the relationship to the eyebrows, the eyelids, the amount of white around the eye, like how much white you can see below or above the pupil, and the mouth, and the relationship between those three things. You should be able to nail every expression with just those. You want to avoid, so I look in the mirror at making a subtle expression. I try to look at those things and see what's going on. Like, are there any lines that are appearing anywhere, like lines under the eyes, or like maybe a furrow in my brow or something like that. And I try to add that in. What you don't want to do with expressions is overdraw it. So you don't want to have too many lines. As much as possible, you want to keep those lines simple. And I'm going to try and hop into Photoshop, because I did get a couple questions about this, drawing expressions. I'm going to try to hop into... Actually, maybe I can just do it now. I'll just do it now. So basically, drawing expressions. We got this face here. Generic face. Okay. Okay. So, a couple things that can change an expression. This is as complicated as I make my expressions in my boards. Sometimes, like if there's a really dramatic facial move, maybe I'll add in like a little line like that. You know, maybe I'll add a little furrow of the brow. But I try not to add too many extra lines to the face. Some things that you want to pay attention to, like I said, are the eyebrows. So just a simple lift in the eyebrows and wide eyes. Straight eyebrows is kind of like not impressed, neutral. Making the top of the eyes touch the pupils. Like be aware of the white space around the pupils. Like if there's widening this space, like leaving a gap in between the top of the eyelid and the pupil is going to give you a shock. Like I was saying, like fear and shock earlier. Might be something like and make the pupils smaller. Hold on. Something like this is quite bad, but like you get the idea. Change the mouth. But this is so bad. But like the white above the eyes is going to give that feeling of kind of like shock. Whereas like if we lower the eyelids here, it completely changes the expression. So it's really the relationship between those two things, the eyelids, the eyes, the eyebrows, and the mouth. Acting is all in the eyes. So, yeah, another thing that I think about a lot when drawing eyes. Give a little smile here. When the eyes are looking forward, the pupils are round. A shorthand way though, whoops, okay. If you're looking somewhere else though, the pupils start to get more flat. If you're looking off to the side. It's almost like a line. Instead of doing this, make flat pupils. Same, that goes too for like looking down. Sometimes all you need is a little line. So these are like just simple ways to kind of shorthand your expressions. Yeah, let's see. Sometimes like a tiny little line under the eye. I don't know. This is dumb, but you know, don't add that little smile line. But like these tiny little lines. But that's the thing is you don't want to start adding in too many lines, because then your characters start to look old and you lose the expression, the core of the expression. So only add extra lines where absolutely necessary. So I guess that's kind of the gist of how I do emotions quickly. Let me know if you want me to get more specific with that, but I'm going to move on.
I think someone, also with expressions, because Tumble mentioned that they feel like their expressions feel very stiff and very neutral, is also body language too.
Oh yeah.
It comes into how your character is feeling and expressing.
Absolutely. Like body language is 80% of it. Subtle things like, you know, that's enough to give an expression. 2 dots and But like subtle things like raising the shoulders or drooping the shoulders. And these are obviously like really simple, but like just to kind of give you an idea. You know, those are just shoulders, but yeah, the whole pose is really where you're going to capture the expression. And I touch on that a little bit later with like gesture drawing and how important it is for storyboarding, but I'll get into that. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing for expressions.
Yeah. And if people want to go more into that, we can also have another webinar at some point.
Definitely. Okay, and then, so what are some ways to add more emotion? Borfdog is asking, what are some ways to add more emotion to a scene without words or big movement? So small details, like your eyes widening or wind blowing through your hair, which are both really creative solutions, I think. Some things that come to mind for me right away are small things like eye darts, just not moving any of the drawing, but just shifting the eyes, moving back and forth. That can say a lot. Slow camera push-ins, close-up shots, even a well-placed blink can do wonders for like communicating an emotion. Those are really subtle things. But the thing is that in the end, it's all going to depend on your story, you know, and what's appropriate for your character and their personality to be doing. Like, are they feeling embarrassed about their feelings? Are they wearing their emotions on their sleeve? Are there several emotions going on at the same time? All of that is going to determine how you're going to get specific with adding emotions to your scene. So the more specific you can be, the better. And a really great way to think about this is to think back on a time that you felt that emotion and try to pull something from that, from your life experience, and add it to your storyboard. And that's going to make your work feel truly emotional and make it stand out. So for things like adding emotion to a scene, you know, like you could show a person crying, but like if the story hasn't earned it, it's not going to feel authentic. Like don't expect your audience to feel anything if the story hasn't earned it. So there's no real like shortcuts to making an audience feel emotional. You want the story to be emotional, if that makes sense. Yeah, and so just be careful. You don't want to be telling your audience what to feel by the way that your character is acting. You want to be showing a story, and that story should make them cry. Or whatever emotion you want them to feel. You got to make sure that they're earned through the story. Yeah, because it can easily become really corny if you're showing lots of emotions, but the story doesn't warrant it, or we don't really know why the character is feeling this way. So in this case, I believe less is more. Our director, who we were just working with, had this really... I kind of forget what he said specifically, but he was basically against ever showing tears, and he had a really good reason for it, and I think it was like you don't want to... he was saying basically like you don't want to show the character actually feeling those emotions, which seemed counterintuitive to me because I come from animation, and so we want to see the character feeling these things and be close to them feeling that, but I thought he had a really good point there. Yeah, I'm sorry, I probably need to dig up some more specific examples of this, but yeah, just be careful with trying to add in emotion to your scenes. Try to bring it from the storytelling rather than just the expressions on the character's face. And expressions on the character's face are definitely important. You just don't want that to be the only thing that's communicating the emotions. That's all. Hope that's clear. So how do you... Tumble is asking, how do you draw loosely while still making clear images? Similarly, what's the best way to draw out emotions quickly? So I kind of just gave you a tutorial of how I draw emotions, just focusing on those basic things. But the best way to practice this is to practice life drawing, and especially gesture drawing. If you can get yourself to a real life drawing session, and go to one that has quick poses. 15 to 30 seconds is really what you want to practice with. They also have some online resources for life drawing, but like drawing in person is so much better. This is really the best way to improve your posing, to get out of that those stiff drawings, those stiff expressions. Practice gesture drawing. Try to draw quickly and efficiently. Focus on things like the line of action, the weight of the character, and try not to, especially for storyboarding, don't worry about things like anatomy. Like, understand anatomy deeply, but don't be drawing it every time you sit down to draw a character. Try to find a shorthand for your characters before you start boarding. Like, practice drawing your characters. Just pull up a sheet and just draw your character in a bunch of different positions, and try to get a feel for what your own personal shorthand is. Every storyboard artist has a different shorthand for the characters, but a quick, simplified way to draw it. Think about what lines are important and how you can break these things down into larger shapes. A great way to do this is to draw the outline first and then fill in the details. Like, don't draw the clothes, just draw the outline and the shapes, and then fill in with as few lines as possible the details. You could even do the expression with just dot eyes and break it down into simple shapes. Challenge yourself to see how few lines you can use. So somebody who really explains this really well is Norman LeMay. I think he wrote a book, but I'm not really sure if it's still in circulation or if you can still buy it. I think it was a limited run, but you can find him on Instagram at GrizzandNorm. He gives great tips on gesture drawing and gesture drawing for storyboarding specifically. I highly recommend looking him up. I'm going to have him on my list of storyboard resources as well. So that's my answer to that. Gesture drawing is where it's at. Okay, and then this is a great question. I'm sure this is
Real
what...
quick,
Go ahead. Sorry.
Real quick, just tagging on the end of that, I know Scooter Stones a little bit up the chat had asked as well about breaking out of the desire to that need to make things perfect and too detailed when you're working on storyboards. Gesture drawing and all that stuff that Siobhan was talking about, that's how you're going to break that habit, is just drawing things quickly. Set limitations for yourself. Do little 30-second, 15-second, 5-second sketches. You know, just practice drawing fast, and that will start. You'll start to develop that as an ability to just be able to draw less is more, and then you apply that in your drawings.
Yeah, definitely. Even starting before you start storyboarding, I've noticed that like doing a quick life drawing session right before I start to board can help me be a lot more expressive and clear and simplify my drawing. So that can help. Yeah, perfectionism, I think that's something that I struggle with a lot personally. Like, if I'm given the time and the space, I will noodle stuff to no end. I'll never stop. And so storyboarding is really liberating for me in that way, because it doesn't matter at the end of the day what the drawings look like. All that matters is that the story is clear. And so you have to learn to let go of that, and learn to let go of your drawings too, because a lot of them are going to get thrown out in the process of storyboarding for a production. Like, most of those drawings aren't going to make it through, so you can't get too precious about it. Yeah, I'm trying to think. There was one more thing I was going to say about that perfectionism. Yeah, just time yourself, you know, like work with a bigger brush. If you find yourself drawing in too many details, just blow up your brush and like try to bring your screen down. Like, work it like this size and do your storyboards like this, and use a massive brush and try to get it out that way and see how that works. And time yourself. So those are my tips. Okay. Moving on. Jumped. asked, and I know this is a question that probably everyone is wondering, or a lot of you are wondering. I really want to become a storyboard artist. Do you have any advice about how to get into the field, or get in as a storyboard revisionist? What are crucial elements to have in a portfolio? Do you recommend any online or college alternative classes that train animators? In this case, I'm assuming that you mean trained storyboard artists, because animation is a completely different thing. I'd be suggesting different things for animation, but for story, I do have some suggestions. The biggest advice that I can give you for this, and I think the fastest way to improve and get yourself to be at the level that you need to be, is to go look up the credits on IMDb of your favorite shows and your favorite movies and find the storyboard artists or the story revisionists that worked on that. Go look at their portfolios, because those are literally going to be the people that you're competing with for jobs. So unless you're at that skill level, you're not where you need to be a professional yet. And so without any college training or anything, I think that's the best way to gauge where you stand, where you stand and where you need to improve. And then you just need to figure out how to fill in the gaps from there. Maybe you need to do more life drawing. Maybe you need to take more classes on cinematography. Maybe you need to do more film studies and develop your own unique voice. Or simply, maybe you just need to make more work for your portfolio. Obviously, you're going to need a portfolio website. And business cards are a great thing to have. Not necessarily, but they're great to have if you're networking in person, you meet somebody new. I give out a lot of business cards when I meet people at networking events and stuff. And in your portfolio, what you want to focus on, roughly, this is very general, but you want to focus on having 3 storyboard sequences. These are the best ones you've ever done. Your highest quality work is going to go first at the top of your website. Ideally, you're going to want to showcase different genres, action, comedy, and drama, etc. Only show your best work. Don't have too much work. Like 3 storyboard sequences is ideal, because recruiters don't have a lot of time to go through this stuff. They often only look at the first one before they move on. And if they really like your stuff, then they'll continue looking. If you want to have additional stuff like life drawings and comics and other work, films, have it on a separate page of your portfolio. Try to be active on social media. Instagram these days is essentially a second portfolio. I've heard stories about people in interviews having the interviewer bring up their social media and reviewing it in the interview. And they had no idea that was coming. So that it's a great way to get it out there, get recruiters to see your work, and industry professionals who might want to work with you. I personally have to work on this a bit. I'm personally really bad at it, but I know that this is definitely a way to get people seeing your work and letting them know what it is that you want to do. There's a lot of professionals out there on Instagram, and recruiters will go through social media looking for new artists. And then attend in-person networking events if you can. If you can afford it, to go to like Lightbox Expo or CTN Animation Expo. Women in Animation, they're great if you sign up for that. They have all kinds of events, in-person stuff, and classes and free webinars and stuff all the time. They're great. Any drawing meetups that people post about. And just when you meet people, talk to them and ask about their journey, and see what their steps were to get where they're at. So there's a lot to talk about here in preparing a portfolio and what it takes to be a professional and how to break into the industry. But hopefully that's kind of just, those are the main points that I think of. I also have some additional resources on my resources list. There's an artist named Natalie Nurigat, if you've ever heard of her. She used to work at Disney. She wrote a book or a graphic novel called I Moved to LA to Work in Animation. And for me, that was really helpful when I was starting out. It's an autobiographic novel that she wrote about breaking into the animation industry. Natalie didn't have any college experience, and she just worked her way in. And it's a really great resource, I think, for anybody trying to break in, especially if you don't have an art school education. And then I would say some great alternatives. The what?
I said I got that book too, and that's how I got my job in the industry through the recommendations in that book. So
Yeah,
highly recommend.
highly recommend. It's such a good, it's great. It's got a lot of great tips. And also, it's just so relatable because she talks about how difficult it can be too. Like, persistence and patience is a huge part of this. And, you know, like right now, it's a really rough time in the industry. Like, everybody's looking for work. Even seasoned professionals with like 10 years experience are out of work, you know? Um, so it's just a rough time right now. And I think you need to build a certain level of resilience in this industry, and just hang in there and keep, you know, if you are persistent and passionate, you're going to make it. It's only a matter of time. So some great alternatives to college that I would suggest, CDA, the Concept Design Academy, is amazing. Their classes are a little pricey, but definitely worth it, I would say. They're taught by current industry professionals, really talented ones. They have small class sizes, and it's an opportunity to get one-on-one feedback on your work and build your portfolio. And I've known several artists who dropped out of CalArts, like in their first or second year, took a CDA class and got their first industry job. So I would definitely recommend that. Another one that's a little bit more affordable, Schoolism. It's about $30 a month. You can sign up for just 1 month. Will get you access to all their classes. Some classes that I've taken on there that I would definitely recommend are Storyboarding for Feature Animation by Alessandra Sorrentino. She was a storyboard artist at Cartoon Saloon. And Gesture Drawing by Alex Wu. That's a really great gesture drawing class. So I highly recommend those.
Alex Wu was my old boss.
Really?
Yeah, he's the CEO at Cuckoo Studios.
Oh, no way. I didn't know that.
Where, yeah, the show I worked on was his show, Go Go Corey Carson. He's really cool. He's really nice.
Yeah. And he teaches a really great gesture drawing class. That's all I really know about him, is that I took his class and it completely changed my way about how to think about gesture, especially for storyboarding.
Nice.
Okay, and then I just want to answer a couple questions here that I see coming up. I see people talking about going through frame by frame. Oh yeah. Definitely going frame by frame through this ties into film studies, which I'm going to go over next. Ways to study movement, like if you haven't studied animation before, going through videos of like people playing sports or films that you like, pausing it and then drawing from that is a good way to do it. Yeah. Yeah, and then the Stray Mutt Bones here is saying, like, you're training your mind to see a pose and memorize it, rather than looking at the object and drawing at the same time. You want to look for a pose you like. Yeah, and kind of picture it in your head. So you want to kind of, what would be great, this is why cafe drawing is so great, because people notice when you're drawing them, so you kind of have to like glance really quickly and then look down and do your drawing based on what you saw in that brief little second. Or you can stare at them and make things really awkward like I do, but like ideally you want to just like get a glimpse and kind of memorize it. But the more that you do figure drawing and the more you get a handle for drawing those shapes and the relationships and the proportions and anatomy and everything, the quicker you're going to get at doing that. But really, I'd say practice doing quick life drawing first. That's where I would start before you go out trying to do that kind of thing. Yeah. Okay. So some suggestions I would have for how to improve. So you're here and you want to improve. We're improving all the time as artists and story artists especially. Some great ways to do it are film studies. Kind of like what I was showing you guys earlier with going through like the Jurassic Park scene, or breaking down that 180 flip, little things like that. Film studies of your favorite films. or films that you would like to work on are going to help you develop your own unique voice and help you develop a better vocabulary for film language. Gesture drawing, do as much of that as you can until it becomes second nature. But I think one of the most important things is really finding what you love. Like, what movies do you want to make? What is your dream project? And I think this is really important to keep in mind throughout your career. Maybe in the early days you're just trying to get a job, but as time goes on, like, you start thinking about this more and more. Like, directors are going to want to work with you because of your unique perspective, your storytelling style, and your personal life experiences, and what you bring to the project as an artist and a storyteller. Being flexible enough to work on a variety of different styles and productions is very important in being a professional, but I believe it's really more important that you have your own unique voice. And so learning to develop that. You hear a lot of people say, like, never put anything in your portfolio that you wouldn't want to work on yourself. So if you want to work in feature animation, don't make a storyboard portfolio that looks like it's made for TV. And vice versa. If you want to work in TV, don't have a storyboard driven or a feature film driven portfolio. Don't board horror if you want to work on preschool shows, you know. It's like, it might not seem that important when you're just starting out, but you do want to try to develop your own style. Think of yourself as a storyboard artist as really you're a director. Every scene you take is you're directing it. And every artist that touches the scene is going to do it completely different. There's no right or wrong way to do it. So you just got to find your way of doing it and what you love. And then I just wanted to show you guys quickly some examples of some film studies that I've done in the past. Just to show you, like, what I'm talking about when I say film studies. This is just an example. Can you guys see this okay? You should be able to.
Yes, it's a little small, but yes, we can see it.
Okay, I'm going to zoom in here. So this is from Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, a classic movie. But it's just like, it's in this square format because it's an older movie. Just figuring out basic things like the composition, where's the horizon line, where the characters are, and then little notes on what's going on. I'm just trying to figure out what's happening. What I'm noting down is things like how the horizon line shifts here. There's a pan that's going on here as this guy rolls off. How the horizon line here from this shot to this shot stays at the same level. You know, this could almost be a jump shot with how close these characters are, but it's a completely different composition, and that's why it works. Anyway, these are the things I'm looking at and thinking about. Here's the camera move as he walks past camera. But this is an example of what my film studies look like when I'm interested in learning why a scene feels a certain way. And I just try to make notes on it. I have some more. I have a really crazy one. Princess Mononoke is one of my favorite movies, but I knew that, like, just drawing it wasn't going to be enough to really analyze the filmmaking. So I went and screenshotted. Oh, come on. There we go. I went and screenshotted this whole scene of where they first go into the forest and they see the forest spirit for the first time. Ashitaka sees the forest spirit for the first time. And I went through and, like, I didn't even finish doing this, but I just knew there was so much going on. I really wanted to look at the actual frames from the film. So this is one way to do it. You can screenshot it and then make notes for yourself about what's going on. A better way to do it, though, is to draw the drawings. But like I said, this is just such a masterful scene. I really wanted to be able to come back to it over and over again and analyze it.
Ghibli films also have a great resource in that you can purchase, they've made available the storyboards for their movies in the form of books.
Yeah.
And it's the rough storyboards that they used in the actual movies, and so it's really great to study this as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Ghibli's a little weird because, like, Miyazaki does all the storyboards himself and basically animates most of the movie. He, like, does almost all the keyframes himself and stuff. So it's a little different than what it would actually be like to work on a production, especially here in the States. but it is still a great way to get like an idea of how he's thinking about how to craft a story. And then this is like, I didn't like this movie. I don't think I even saw this movie, but I saw the trailer and I was like, whoa, that was a cool action scene. And so I tried to figure that out really quick. Having the different characters here in different colors and just figuring out how these shots worked. Yeah, so that's basically, I don't want to go too much into it, but that's an example of film studies. That's a really great way to expand your film vocabulary. And that is it for my presentation. I'm sorry, I feel like that went on quite a while, but I do have, let me see, my email is here. Where is it? There we go. So yeah, like I said, this is my email here. Feel free to reach out anytime in the future, guys, with questions that you have, or if you want feedback on your work. I'd love to come back here and do like a critique session. I think that'd be really helpful. If you're working on something and you want a second pair of eyes, like I'm happy to help in it in whatever way I can, or give like career advice, anything. Like I said, I can't guarantee that I'll respond like right away, but I'll definitely try my best to get back to you guys. And feel free to reach out at any point in the future too. If it's like a couple years down the road or something, just, yeah, my door is always open. So.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Siobhan. This was wonderful. I mean, I know I learned a bunch of new stuff that was very exciting. And I just from looking at the chat here, everyone else also learned a lot of really wonderful things. And so thank you so much for coming in here and sharing with us. This is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so, thank you for inviting me. I'm really like honored to be here to be talking about this. This is my first presentation on storyboarding, by the way. And I feel like I learned a lot just from having to compile my thoughts. But yeah, I'm really happy to be here. Thanks again for inviting me, Sarah.
No problem. Thank you for coming. And thank you all for coming as well, everyone who's in attendance. We will definitely be having more webinars and workshops in the future. I believe the next one that we'll be planning will be specifically focused on perspective drawing. So if you want to get a better handle on how to draw things in perspective and how that especially applies to storyboarding and changing the feel of different shots or just being able to communicate what you want to your audience, that's what we'll be setting up and planning next. Which, Siobhan, if you want to join us on that, you are always welcome.
Yeah, I'd love to sit in on that even and just like hear. I feel like I struggle with perspective sometimes, so yeah, love to come to that.
Definitely. Amber says congrats, you did great for your first time.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Oh, and then
hello.
Go ahead. Sorry.